Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I will tell you that the acoustics in the room are not the best if you're on the back 5 rows. So if you want to come back down, it's not church. We're not going to ask you for any donations. We're not going to pass a book around, or we're not going to make you sing hymns, unless you really want to. So we're going to get started today with our second panel of our multimodal session. This one is more related to passenger movement. Our first panel that Katie pulled off magnificently discussed our freight movement in the state, and I'll see how many boop, boop we can do with this thing. We're going to talk about and focus on passenger movement in the state, and we have an excellent panel for you today, and we're going to do it in a very kind of conversational way. And the idea and goal here of this panel is really to kind of give you an idea of some of the choices that are out there. You know, we think of ourselves as Texas as, you know, we all drive our pickup trucks to wherever we want to go and do things that way, but there are other choices in the state for how to get around inside cities and across the regions of the state. And so we're going to talk a little bit about and provide you a little exposure to some of the options that are in the state and some of the things that are evolving as far as different types of movement within the state of Texas. So we've got a great panel with me today. We have with us our Director of Public Transportation Division, my counterpart in transit, Eric Gleason. We also have with us Mr. Rick Skinner, who's an independent sales contractor for Greyhound, our intercity bus provider in the state. We have Jim Cline with us, who's the president of the Denton County Transportation Authority in the Metroplex area. And we have Travis Kelly, his vice president of government relations of the Texas Central Railway. So what we're going to try to do is paint a little picture for you of how transit works in the state from a statewide perspective, how we have movements across the state through intercity service that's provided, then focus a little bit on some of the transit opportunities that are provided that folks like Jim provide. And then we're going to provide a little sex and sizzle with Mr. Travis Kelly, who's going to talk about high-speed rail and the game-changing opportunity that's going to bring the state. So with that, let me give you a little background about Mr. Gleason. We're going to give everybody a chance to provide some opening comments and thoughts about some of these things. As I mentioned, Eric's the Public Transportation Division Director. They work with over 30 state-funded urban transit districts and 39 rural transportation systems in the state. What's very interesting is that Eric's background, he is someone that's been involved deeply in transit, having worked in the Seattle area, King County, and working in transit in that area. He has a bachelor's in degree from the University of New Hampshire. How'd you get here from New Hampshire?
It's a long story, man.
And a master's degree in regional city planning from University of North Carolina. Our second discussion panelist, Mr. Skinner, as I mentioned, he works with Greyhound. They provide intercity bus service in East Texas and major stakeholder in the Longview Multimodal Center. Rick has 30 years of experience with intercity bus operations on the local level. He's also the vice chair of East Tex Connects, a committee of elected officials, their appointees, citizens, and representatives of social agencies, local transportation providers, and businesses that are located in the 14 counties that comprise the State Planning Region 6 in East Texas. The committee's purpose is to improve the quality of life in East Texas through transportation choices. Their mission is to create and connect comprehensive, flexible, sustainable public transportation system throughout and beyond the 14 counties. Mr. Cline, having worked with the Denton County Transportation Authority, it's a very interesting and wonderful group that Jim has up there. They're probably one of the biggest success stories one can say about developing transit that we have in the state as well as in the country. And let me give you just a little background about DCTA is a funded entity by a dedicated sales tax of the cities of Denton, Louisville, and Highland Village in Denton County. It is a multimodal transportation agency that operates a fixed route bus system, paratransit, general demand response, van pools, as well as a 21-mile commuter rail system known as the A-Train. The A-Train was launched a couple years back in June of 2011. It's a $320 million locally funded project that connects with DART and provides residents with an alternative to commuting by automobile in the I-35 East corridor between Denton and Dallas. They also provide bus service improvements with the launch of the A-Train that yielded record ridership since 2008. Jim has been at the helm since March of 2010. He's a well-experienced veteran in the field, having worked with Kimberly Horn, as well as 20 years experience in municipal public works and transportation experience in cities such as Beaumont and Irving. Jim has a Bachelor of Science and a Master's of Civil Engineering from Texas A&M, so you're home here, right? He's also a registered professional engineer and a distinguished veteran of the U.S. Army, so we appreciate him being here. And finally, we have Travis Kelly, as I mentioned, is Vice President of Government Relations. Just to kind of give you a little background, Texas Central is a privately funded railway that is promoting a high-speed rail system that will offer faster and safer option for travel between Houston and Dallas. The project promoted by Texas Central Railway will not be built or operated by a government agency, funded by the federal government, or subsidized by taxpayers, but instead be funded by private investors and built and operated by private entities. Very different approach to high-speed rail than we've heard in the past. Texas Central Railway is a U.S. company headquartered in Texas. TCR staff is collaborating with cities, counties, the department, and communities along the project's route. Travis manages the TCR's marketing, state and federal and government affairs, as well as all local government, public, and stakeholder outreach. He is a graduate of Baylor University and has been with them since 2001. So as you see, we have a very distinguished panel, and I will let them begin with their opening comments, and we'll take questions afterwards. If you see the very artisan crafted sign in front of us with a number on it, it is not to order pizza or lunch, but it is an opportunity for you if you want to provide a question, you want to get a little bit of more information from one of our panelists, please feel free to use that number and text a question, and we'll be able to take that information, and after the panelists have a few opening remarks, and I maybe throw a few salvos just to keep them honest, we'll field your questions as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Gleason.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. One way to think about the panel is you might want to try and start a trip in far west Texas and make a connection from a rural transit system in far west Texas to Greyhound. And from Greyhound, you may take that into Denton County somewhere. In Denton County, you can get on high-speed rail at some point. So we're going to start in the rural areas of our state and end up in the future on high-speed rail. One of the transportation systems that Eric has talked about that many folks either don't fully grasp the significance of or the scale of in this state, that TxDOT is very engaged with on a daily basis in helping to make happen, our rural and smaller urban area transit systems. And I think in terms of both scope and diversity, there are some amazing challenges that these programs go through every day, and how they confront those challenges and how they contribute to our overall transportation system is my objective this morning, to give you some insight there. So if we could have the background slide. I talk about scope and diversity, and what you see on the slide behind me represents the area of the state of Texas that the programs I'm about to talk about operate in. And I think we all understand and appreciate, perhaps more so, the large metropolitan area systems of the state. But what many people don't understand is that rural transit operates in 246 out of the 254 counties in the state of Texas. And in addition to that, and that's represented by all the green you see, and in addition to that, there are 30 smaller urban areas or urbanized areas of Texas that the state provides funding for. Now, all told, those systems operate on an annual basis. They report to us about $220 million of operating budgets. And between the state and the federal funding, formula funding associated with those systems is well over half of their program. So the department itself manages about $90 million of state and federal funds each year for these systems. So absolutely critical to the daily operation of those systems. One of the differences is as a department, we focus almost entirely on building infrastructure. The relationship the department has with most of these systems is largely an ongoing operating relationship. So it's a whole different set of issues, a whole different set of variables that we need to deal with. These are systems that report to us that they carry they provide over 34 million trips a year. They are systems that have every day in place over 3,000 vehicles. Some of them are standard buses you're used to seeing in the urban areas. Some of them look a lot like the airport shuttle vehicles that you see. And some of them are actually sedans and smaller vehicles that may end up traveling 150 miles one way to pick up a rider for a medical trip or to help them get to work. These systems, they operate over 57 million miles of service a year, and they average under one safety incident for every million miles that they operate. I think the actual number is 0.75. So not only are they out there in a very big way, they're actually very, very safe systems as well. So what are the kinds of things that people think about these systems if they think about them at all? And so one of the myths is that these systems are there exclusively and almost primarily as a safety net. And in fact, these systems actually help people get to work every day. In fact, some of the systems, if they're aggressive in their marketing and in their partnerships, as much as 40% of their ridership is actually getting people to and from work. So yes, these are safety net systems that get people to health care who can't drive. They help folks do their shopping, their day-to-day activities. But they're much more than that. And because of that, they're a very valuable part of a growing state's economy. If 30 to 40% of the folks who use these systems are using them to get to and from work. I have a few examples. So in Central Texas, with Tarleton State University, we have a rural transit district who has a partnership with Tarleton State to help them address an on-campus congestion issue. They started up a service this fall, and the first month of that service carried over 11,000 riders. In Waco, they have a brand new football stadium. And the Waco Transit carries 20% of the ridership to that stadium. 20% of the folks getting to the stadium get there by transit. So these systems that you see behind you can be much more than a basic safety net system. They are not only connecting communities together, they are also helping the department address congestion in some very congested corridors. Another example of helping folks get to work, we have providers in the Panhandle area of Texas who work closely with Cargill. Cargill Meat Solutions, I like the name of the company. But anyways, and one of our carriers up there last year provided over 200,000 trips, taking folks, employees of Cargill, to work. Cargill closed down a facility in Plainview, Texas, and we began operating, supporting the operation of a service out there to take folks from Plainview to Frio, which is about 80 miles one way every day. And so 70 to 80 employees who used to work and live in Plainview now live in Plainview but work in Frio have service every day. So it's a big part of the system out there. These systems, many people perceive them to be sort of relatively low on the complexity, low on the technology scale, when in fact a lot of them are using cutting-edge technology solutions to dispatch and track their vehicles. They are systems that are aggressively pursuing complicated financial partnerships with institutions like Tarleton State, with major employers like Cargill. And so these systems in their environment are extremely innovative. They have one card systems where Riders can purchase a card and use it for any purpose. Many of them are at the leading edge of technology applications that are useful for them. From a complexity of business standpoint, these are highly regulated systems. It's really unbelievable, the sets of regulations that they are expected to comply with and to do in such a fashion that it doesn't endanger their eligibility for federal and state funding. Not an easy job, and I'm not sure how they all do it. Diversity of funding. Many of them carry funding streams, 40 to 50 to 60 different funding streams that they cobble together and run their system with. And of course, each one of those funding streams requires at the end of the day that they be able to tell them how their money was spent, was it well used, and what did they get in return for their investment. So very complicated that way. And then mostly these are people moving people. And this is not, you're not constructing a bridge, these are not widgets on a production line. The complexity of running a labor-intensive organization, working in an environment over which you don't have a tremendous amount of control, is incredibly challenging on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of this we take for granted, that it's an amazingly complex business to work in. And these folks carry it out every day, 34 million trips a year, huge part of our transportation system. A lot of challenges for these folks. The federal program has grown in the past 10 to 15 years. They've done a great job of getting local money into their systems. From the state level, the state program has remained flat. In fact, if you factor in inflation and growth, they're working with about 60% less than what they had in the year 2000. So state funding levels are a challenge for these folks. Asset maintenance and replacement, state of good repair, huge challenge for these folks. What used to be available on the federal level from a discretionary basis under MAP 21 went away. We now get, as a state, we have the largest rural program in the country. We get $1.25 million a year to help with our asset needs. That's the same amount that the state of Vermont gets. So some huge challenges out there on the asset maintenance and replacement environment. Energy sector impacts, not only from driving down difficult roads, but energy sector congestion has doubled travel times for many of these operating agencies, and they can't compete from a wage standpoint with a lot of the employment opportunities in the area. And so it's a huge issue for them. There is no near-term solution out there, and it's something that they're going to need to deal with for the next 15 years. And then finally, I'll mention from a challenge standpoint, making the case that these systems are a part of the future solution for transportation in Texas. They are a good investment. They provide critical mobility services, and one of their challenges is to place them in the middle. How do they make their argument that they are part of the solution?
Mr. Skinner?
I'd like to say I'm Rick Skinner from Longview, Texas, and I am the independent sales contractor for Greyhound for Longview, Texas. And that means that I have a contract with Greyhound to operate a bus system in the city. But speaking of Greyhound, Greyhound is the inner-city transportation provider for the U.S. It's the only company that goes nationwide and provides that service. Greyhound has over 3,800 destinations, 1,200 buses that are in operation. Probably 85–90% of the fleet has been refurbished or is new equipment, and with the current fleet, customers are provided things like electrical outlets, Wi-Fi. Number of seats in the buses have been reduced a little bit to get a little bit more leg room to make passengers' trips a little bit more comfortable. Greyhound is currently owned, their parent company is First Group America. In 1999, actually Greyhound was bought out by a corporation called Laidlaw, and then Laidlaw was bought out by First Group. And First Group has a big umbrella of transportation here in the U.S. and Europe. But on the local level, which is where I'm at, seeing things hands-on, I'm in a multimodal facility in Longview, Texas, and we've got Amtrak, we've got the City Transit has an office there, and then, of course, Greyhound. And as far as a convenience factor, it's very convenient for the passengers to be able to come to one location and supply or, settle all their transportation needs. We do have the case where we have passengers that come in on either Amtrak or Greyhound and will come in and then make a transfer and go to the other. Up until last year, that's when Greyhound moved into the multimodal facility. Prior to that, then there were issues with passengers trying to get transportation from one facility to another facility, and then you had the time issues as far as making connections. If it was a close connection, it wasn't feasible. Greyhound is interested in any multimodal opportunities. They see the advantages of being in the close vicinity to other transportation services, and are open for discussion, for any cities or areas that are interested or moving in that type of direction. As our moderator said, I'm also a member of an organization in East Texas called East Tex Connects, and the mission there, or the purpose, is to make transportation choices easily available to all residents in the areas, regardless of their needs for transportation, as far as, and then also as far as their availability of funds and things along that line. One of the things that East Tex Connects is working to do right now is trying to develop a seamless fare system, kind of like what some of the other areas have, where a person can go in and pay one fare at one provider and then can ride through all the other providers to get to their final destination. We see that as a barrier, as not allowing all people to get the transportation that they need. Intercity bus, like with Greyhound, the big corporations, used to be the case that Greyhound traveled through just about every city, throughout the nation, regardless of the size or, anything like that. One of the things that has come about is Greyhound has had to pull out of a lot of the smaller cities because of the numbers, because of the finances. A big factor, is saying as far as Greyhound going to locations is TxDOT funding and FTA funding to support those routes. As an example, like right now, Greyhound used to go through, like down Highway 79. Greyhound would go through places like Jacksonville, Palestine, Crockett. Greyhound no longer services those cities, and I questioned, some of the higher ups and said, okay, why are we making these changes? I thought we were, expanding and things, and they said, well, it came down to state funding. They said state funding was pulled, and state funding was pulled because of the federal dollars were not being supplied to the state any longer, so Greyhound had to pull out of those areas. Another prime example is going into Galveston, Texas. Kerrville Bus Line, Coach USA used to provide service into Galveston, Texas. Kerrville discontinued their intercity local bus routes. They now have the Go Bus, which is just doing the major cities. And because they pulled out, and Greyhound no one has picked that up because they say, well, because of the funding. So there are some challenges, that go along with the process of trying to provide transportation to all the customers in all areas. Yeah. The East Tex Connects group has developed a regional mobility guide, which is East Tex Connects is a 14-county East Texas area, and we've developed a guide that can try to get the word out to all the passengers or potential passengers to let them know what services are provided in what areas, and to help them better plan their trips. Now, I've got copies of our regional mobility guide are available up front here, if anyone would like to take a look at that and see, kind of have an example of what we're doing. East Tex Connect is still further, trying to increase the transportation opportunities. One project that we've got going right now, Amtrak uses a bus service for passengers to get to and from Shreveport, Louisiana. That service typically has a lot of available seats. It's never at capacity. There's been brought up the idea of using this additional capacity to transport veterans to the VA hospital in Shreveport, which veterans, are typically on a fixed income, and it would be a opportunity to utilize the available seats, but then provide a service, where it's really needed. I think that's all I have, unless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Jim?
A couple of things I'd like to bring up, and we bring the perspective of our role as a regional urban transit provider, and we link to the DART system. We carried over 3 million passengers last year, just in our system between our bus and our rail. And a couple of things, maybe take a little bit different tact on this, is offer a couple of things to think about, and some of the things that I feel are going to shape this industry and what we do in the next several years. And one of the things that we look at in particular is that we're providing transportation choices. We're not going to be a solution for everyone or for every problem, but there are a lot of folks that we can provide service for. And so I think that's one of the things that as you go into this, if there's an assumption that we can eliminate cars altogether, we don't need highways, it's folly, right? We need to find a way to make this system of systems work. And so that's the transit, the highway, the bike, the pedestrian, high-speed rail, Greyhound, the rural providers. How does this system of systems come together to make this all work? We have had some great experience in the rail side. We're a bit of a non-traditional commuter rail system in that most traditional commuter rail systems come into town in the morning and come out in the evening. We have a 50,000 student university, a set of universities in Denton that essentially create two-way peak hour traffic for us in the Denton County area. And we learned a lot about that in terms of how to implement a system with quiet zoning, with how to minimize neighborhood impacts. People love stations and they hate rails. And how do you deal with, in our case, 42 grade crossings and see how we minimize those things. We also learned a lot about customer service. And one of the things that we found as the North Central Texas region is our customers don't really care if it's a DCTA train or bus, a DART bus, a T bus, the TRE. They care about being able to get on a vehicle and get to where they want to go. So between our different agencies, we have a regional fare policy that allows a DCTA issued regional pass is good on DART. DART's regional passes are good on our system, and it works all throughout the Metroplex with the Fort Worth T as well. So again, how do you eliminate those barriers? It was brought up earlier with when you were talking about the Greyhound system. Is how do you minimize barriers to make it easy for people to use it? Now, we traditionally carry, and the vast bulk of our rider population is either commuters going to and from work, choice riders. We have some that are transit dependent. We have students. But there's a couple of trends that we see coming forward that I think provide opportunities, particularly for transit and how it's provided. I think back to the time when I was 16 and 18 years old, and I cared about, all I cared about was cars. That was what I wanted. I wanted a driver's license. I wanted to get out and go drive. That was important to me. The millennial generation is very different. They are not all going out and buying cars. In fact, some of them are not even getting driver's licenses. And so they're making choices to live places where they don't have to have a car and don't have to drive everywhere. And so that's a real driver as we look at our customer base. How do you look at how development comes about around stations and how it's linked together to make these systems work? Two other populations I think are important when you look at senior citizens. Folks are living longer. I'm not so sure they're driving longer. And how you keep people from having to move into nursing homes simply because they can't drive? And how can you extend independent mobility for as long as you can? Because all of us will face a time in life when we shouldn't be driving, but we can still get around. And how can we use a system? How can we access and be able to still live in our homes, but get to the grocery store and get to entertainment and do the things that we want to do as we age? And then one other that we're seeing, particularly in our demand responsive system, is the adult children with special needs. The state public school system covers them till they're, I believe, 21, and at that point, they age out of the schools, and they're working through how can these kids are now adults get to jobs or they can't drive, and how can they make those trips? So those are things that we see, again, trends beyond just the commuters and wanting to avoid, I thank TxDOT many days because for the I-35E construction, because it's been wonders for our ridership. It's been awesome. But I think that'll continue for years to come. So one of the things that let me kind of wrap up with the so what for TxDOT partnership. Why does it matter that TxDOT works with transit providers, and how does that come together? I think there's a couple of things that we've got two great examples in the Dallas area on detour planning. The A train, which runs parallel to 35E between Carrollton and Denton, was opened before 35E went under construction. So the day the construction started, there was an alternate to the freeway, and it provided a good part of that detour planning in the big picture. DART's experience on the Red Line was very similar. They opened the Red Line immediately before Central Expressway went under construction, and a lot of people moved off the freeway, got onto the train, and then when the freeway opened back up, they didn't all get off the train. A lot of them stayed. Right. And so there's that parallel facility, detour planning at a grander scale, I think is really important. Right-of-way acquisition. I've heard many right-of-way agents say you get one bite at the apple. You don't want to come in and buy what you need for the highway and then come back later and say, let's take another bite and buy what we need for transit, whether it's a rail corridor or bus lanes or whatever it is. But cooperative efforts on right-of-way acquisition can be very, very, very advantageous, particularly as you look at many of these projects that when you start widening into commercial areas become whole takes and effectively whole takes with damages to remainder, and it would be next to zero to widen that out a little bit more to provide a transit corridor. Providing HOV lanes and managed lanes during construction. That's a real challenge, but if you try to put people on a bus on 35W and you're going to put them in the same traffic with everybody else, they won't ride the bus. It's got to be, you got to think through that a little bit on how that can happen. Can under these CDAs can you manage having a defined HOV lane, whether it's on a shoulder or whatever the law would allow, but is there a way to facilitate an alternative to just waiting in traffic or just, which has been said before, and I remember during the high five construction, just stay away was part of the detour plan. And so that would be something we want to look at. Money is always a big deal for everybody. We talked about ours being built with local dollars. That's not because we didn't try to get state or federal money, it's because we couldn't. But there are ways to think through cost avoidance in contrast to project funding. And I think that's where the grandest opportunity is with TxDOT and the transit authorities, is how can we jointly come together, and there will always be challenges with providing project funding for rail lines or bus lines or BRT or whatever the solution might be. But there's always ways that if you do something smarter with right-of-way acquisition, with how it's operated, how you fund detours, Those are things that could provide opportunities for good partnerships with TxDOT. And I think as you look down the road, we've all talked about it. There's all kinds of issues out there with, excuse me, in Dallas, we're hearing a lot about I-345, how the planners coming in saying we need to eliminate a highway, and I'm a traffic engineer as my background. I'm saying, well, that's all good and fine, but how are the people going to go from point A to point B? But the trend is away from putting a whole lot more capacity out there. How do we take the traditional solutions to improving capacity in the highways when we run out of space or we run out of the public's tolerance for those expansions and the impacts of those expansions? And I think that's where, when you start looking at that, that's where transit can be that partner, and how can we provide a total solution? And again, it's a system of systems. How can you make them work together? We cannot work without the highways, and I believe you're going to find we cannot work without the transit system as well. So I'll turn it over to Travis.
Travis?
Thanks. I didn't plan for any sex or sizzle this morning. Didn't get that memo, so apologies in advance. Thanks for the invitation. I often find myself following a group of gentlemen or ladies who are involved in transportation systems that already exist, and I'm obviously not in that situation. But we're working really hard to make it happen. As Eric mentioned, we've been around for about 4 years, working in Texas kind of quietly, fairly quietly, because we're not going through the typical 2035 long-range transportation plan and all the usual process because we're a private company and we have a private project, and we wanted to make sure that we have a project before we got everyone all excited about it. I talk about spending $1 to justify the next 5. So we've been doing a lot of engineering and some advanced environmental work purely to verify that we do indeed have a business case for our project. And every study that comes back says, yeah, you guys do indeed have a project. What brought us to Texas, I'm from Texas. What brought the company to Texas was the market. It's a really, really interesting market where you have, Jim talks about the two-way demand as a result of the universities in Denton. And we found that Dallas and Houston have a very, very same situation where you have very even demand between two generally equal-sized population centers. In sharp contrast to, say, Chicago, St. Louis, where you would have a lot of demand to Chicago, but not as much to St. Louis, so you might have a lot of empty trains. Our models continue to show us that we'll have pretty steady and even demand throughout the day, north and south. There's a lot of, as you can imagine, friendly rivalry between the Dallas and Houston offices in our company. No one from our Houston office is here, so I won't rag on Houston in this setting. But nonetheless, there's a lot of demand, and that was really key to the project's validation, we think. I think in Eric's description alone of the project, the word private came up half a dozen times, and it's on our website probably 100 times. And it's not because we're trying to, pound you with that, but it really is a different approach to making these big projects happen. And we're very clear throughout that we don't see this as a solution for high-speed rail everywhere. We think it'll work between Dallas and Houston. We're really confident that it will work between Dallas and Houston. But there will probably be several different types of delivery methods for high-speed rail within the state of Texas alone. Probably different technologies that make sense in Texas, much less on a national scale. But we think we found a solution for the Dallas-Houston market. And we've been working for about 4 years doing environmental work and engineering work. The NEPA process, we will be fully NEPA compliant. The Federal Railroad Administration and TxDOT are the co-lead agencies for our environmental process, which started officially on June 25th when the notice of intent was published. The public scoping meetings for our project will take place beginning next Tuesday in Dallas and working our way south to Houston. We'll have a meeting in Bryan. A total of 6 meetings. And so that'll be the first chance for the public to see a lot of the alignments we've been working on, a lot of the alignments that the agencies and others have inserted of the project for evaluation, and really get to know the project as we're proposing it. That information, the information on the meetings will be available, or is available now at DallasHoustonHSR.com. and eventually the maps will be posted on there as well. But we have a really good relationship with TxDOT. As many of you know, TxDOT was awarded a $15 million federal grant. It was a Recovery Act grant that they applied for and won for preliminary engineering and environmental work between Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston. At that same time, we had been doing very quietly a lot of engineering work and testing the business case for a very similar project that TxDOT was pursuing. We came to TxDOT and we both parties realized that there was $15 million, but there probably wasn't $15 million in one. There's just no consensus politically to have a state-funded high-speed rail program, and federal grants, even at that time, were on their way out. There was no more Recovery Act money. There were no federal appropriations for a high-speed rail program, and so working with TxDOT and the Federal Road Administration, we were able to self-fund our environmental process, which is very unique. But we just see this as the cost of doing business, as part of mitigating the risk associated with a big infrastructure project like this. And the state was able to focus that money largely on a separate environmental impact statement between Fort Worth and Dallas, which is really important in that region. Those of us who live inside of it just think, oh, well, it's just Fort Worth over there. And those who don't live in the region just see it all as one region in many ways. But we're often reminded that Dallas and Fort Worth are about as far apart as Baltimore and Washington, D.C. So it really is a pretty dynamic opportunity here to have two high-speed rail alignments connecting in Dallas in some way, and providing service between Fort Worth and Houston. And then, of course, linking in with the other projects that Eric has working between the Metroplex and Austin, San Antonio. So we think we're going to be a part of that system, and it is a system of systems. It's an exciting opportunity, and it's a fun project to be a part of. And the next couple of weeks, we'll have an opportunity to engage with the public. The general public. We've been working quite a bit with stakeholders and elected officials and others, but the general public, to get their feedback and hear their concerns and thoughts, suggestions, and so forth. Through the environmental process. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Travis. Before we go to the questions that the audience has provided, I have a couple of things that wanted to kind of throw to the audience as well as the panel. One of the things that was mentioned was the connections and being able to find accessibility to these things. Just out of curiosity, how many in the audience know or have the ability to understand where to go to look to see if they have transit near where they live or work? So that's telling you there's a good job being done. But there was a lot of hands that weren't raised that didn't know that there's accessibility to them. What are you seeing in the industry that's being done to provide more information to the end user on how they may access transit services?
Well, one of the things that we do at DCTA is push a lot of, we have a marketing communication staff, 3 folks that reach out to different communities, try to find ways to, how can we, number one, do we need to improve our service to reach folks, right? That's typically, transit's not real complicated. You provide more service, you get more ridership. It's pretty straightforward in that regard. But how do you do that in the most efficient way possible within a constrained funding environment? And so we try to reach out to folks through a couple of things that we've done. The state fair. One of the best votes of confidence we got last week was one of our highest ridership days. Thursday at the state fair is Senior Citizens Day. And to have a vulnerable population willing to get on our train and ride our system in concert with DART to get down to the state fair is huge. Mm-hmm. And then we had another example of that was game day service with University of North Texas. They had a game that was set up. We ran some special service. Actually, and we did not just game day, but we did the bowl game when they played at the Heart of Dallas Bowl. And so we provided an opportunity for almost 1,300 people who probably have not ridden transit before to use our system. So we're trying to reach out and get people to take the first trip. If you take the first trip and you have a good experience, odds are we will find you as a customer. And so that's part of what we try to achieve is how can we get people to take that first trip on transit.
One of the things that's occurring in the rural areas, the challenges are extreme there just because of the remoteness of the population and the accessibility they may have to some of the technology applications to learn about transit. What we found one of the most effective ways to reach folks in these areas is to actually work with caseworkers, if you will. We will go to local workforce boards. We will go to health and human service agencies, and we will, in a sense, almost train the trainer, if you will. We will bring caseworkers up to speed on public transportation options in their communities, and so as their clients come in, they can then provide them with the information they need to access those services. So that's one of the newer approaches that is being used out there to try and connect people to their options in their communities.
One of the things that we hear a lot is we hear a lot of negativity about transit. There are people that will kind of wail against transit in the sense of providing a subsidy and really not, providing any value. I think a couple of you mentioned about the opportunities to connect citizens with employment centers is very intriguing. Can you talk a little bit more about the services that you know of in your service areas and maybe statewide for you, Eric, and how these systems are oriented towards providing economic development opportunities for the regions they serve?
Go ahead and start. We've gotten on the economic development side, we are starting to see more development around our stations and in the vicinity of those stations. So I think that's a positive thing in terms not just of economic development, but also a good solid ridership base. There's a lot of people that want to live by transit, again, because they choose not to drive as much or not at all. And so those things that can make that happen. I think one of the things that we fail at in the transit industry is when we talk about it being a subsidized system. It is. I venture to say that short of a completely privately funded system, we're all in the subsidy business, whether it's the highways, the trucking industry, and it's a bit of a communication issue that we have on how that works. We get a bad rap sometimes on, well, we're going to bring criminals to your neighborhood. I have yet to see anybody get onto a bus with a VCR or a Devo or whatever the now thing is. I'm dating myself with VCRs, but TV set. So don't make very good getaway vehicles. So we've gotten again, there's a lot of education that we try to do. And again, I point back to those senior citizens riding the train to the fair. If that's a group that can feel comfortable riding on the train, then that's what right looks like.
Yeah, on the intercity buses, we see wide range of passengers, from the seniors to the college students, even teenagers, summertime, you have teenagers that go to visit the grandparents for the summer, things like that. So I don't see, where there's a big negativity, as far as in reality, because people have used that type of service, for many, many decades, and they continue to use it.
One of the challenges that smaller systems have is making the case within their own communities as to how important they are to that community. And more and more we're seeing them make that case from an economic impact side. We have systems that when you look at where they spend their money to purchase the things they need to run their system and to maintain their system, we have some systems that go as high as 90% of the money they spend for those purposes get spent right in the community where they are. And so how do you make that case to your county judges, to your local elected officials, to make them understand, how much of an integrated part of their community we are? There are over 12,000 people in Texas that go to work every day in public transportation in some capacity, if not more. And so they're an important source of employment within communities. And so I think the making the case for how you contribute economically to a community is big. We have folks who are, we had one system that was recognized by the local Chamber of Commerce as, as the top employer in their area for employers of over 100 people last year. So I think people need to get out and make the case, and not only in terms of serving the transit-dependent population, but more and more, I think, in Texas, in a growing state and a state so focused on economy and jobs, I think the case needs to be made in that context, and I think it can be.
One of the things that you're talking about, Travis, with bringing the project that you're talking about, can you describe what that is? I don't think most people have had a chance to really kind of understand what high-speed rail is. There's a certain term there, but what does that look like? What does it feel like? What would it provide you that we don't have right now?
Sure. And we don't have what we're proposing to bring to Texas anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, it's kind of a big statement. But what we're proposing is a brand new, from ground up, electrically powered train service that'll be double tracked, again, built from the ground up, brand new, and offer service at least in the peak hours every 30 minutes from each station. A station in Dallas, a station in Houston. And these are very, very impressive trains. If you've not ridden, what we call true high-speed rail, the 186 mile an hour or faster high-speed rail service that's common throughout Europe and Asia, it's a really, really impressive technology. We joke about other train services around the country that you set your coffee cup on the tray, and if you take your hand off, you'll end up wearing your coffee to your meeting. And it's just a different experience. But on these trains, they're just impeccably maintained, they're impeccably operated, and you can set that cup of coffee on the tray table and it's going to stay there until you want your next sip. And that's just a different level of service. It's not just about your coffee, it's about the joy of the experience. We're proposing either 1x2 or 2x2 seating in a center aisle, which means no middle seat. No seat belts. If you see a train with seat belts, get off the train. This is a completely different kind of service. You can huddle with your colleagues and on your way to the meeting. You can have a drink on the way back, or you can rest, or you can talk on your phone and use your computer, whatever you want to do. And it's just a really different experience that we're bringing to Texas. And we see this as, we talk about the economic impact. There are no trains like this in this country, which means that we'll have to have a brand new, highly trained workforce to operate and maintain these systems. So we think the economic impact extends beyond the station location itself. Well, we're sure there will be development around the stations, but we really see this as shrinking the state in a sense. Our president, Robert Eccles, is a former Harris County judge, and when he was in office, he did kind of this back-of-the-envelope study, or had someone that was qualified to do so do one, and determined that the Houston-Dallas market, that Houston had only achieved about a 7% market penetration in Dallas. The languages are similar, the currency is certainly the same. There's certainly a lot of unmet potential there, purely because it's a hassle to get back and forth. And so we think there are a lot of folks that just aren't traveling back and forth because it is such a hassle. And so we think once this system is in place, it'll really just change the way we think about getting back and forth between Dallas and Houston, because it is so pleasant, it's fast, and it's easy. You don't show up tired you keep your clothes on as you go through the station, which is different from airports. So it's just a different experience that we're offering, and I think once it's in place, we'll see that folks will want it wherever they are. If they're not from Dallas or Houston, they'll go home and they'll say, "Why don't we have it here?"
Well, I think we've kind of laid the context for you of kind of different opportunities within the state. Let's now see some of the questions we might be getting on the text line. See what kind of things we can answer for you out there.
The first set of questions are to Travis, and trying to clarify a little bit. Is a private investment, how are you acquiring the corridor that you're using for the service? And will that corridor connect to other locations in the Metroplex for service from more than just Dallas to Houston?
Sure, that's a really good question, and we get that one a lot, obviously. We've obviously studied how to do big projects like this around the country, and in Texas in particular, but also how not to do them. We've been working pretty steadily in the rural part of the state, and as well as in the metro areas. And we've really had a strong focus on identifying existing rights of way that we can use. So this will be brand new infrastructure, of course, but there are some really appealing rights of way that we could perhaps operate within or adjacent to and minimize the impact on existing landowners. And and because we have such a narrow footprint, probably no more than 100 feet total, even when we're at grade, and that's from fence to fence, and it's even less than that when it's elevated. And we're not proposing a multimodal type corridor. It's a train, and it's a couple of tracks. It's about the size of a county road, from bird's eye view. And we have a lot of tools at our disposal to accommodate the current uses of land, that they can continue using them as they have been, either through a large culvert that you can have wildlife and landowner and livestock and farm implement movement underneath, or a viaduct. Over 100 miles of the system at this point is going to be elevated, purely dictated by the wetlands and other environmental concerns we'll have to mitigate, and that's just the easiest way to do it. And it could be much more than that by the time we get through the environmental process. So in terms of acquisition, railroads in Texas do have eminent domain. It's obviously not a process we'd like to use, but it's there for a reason, because otherwise you couldn't have these big projects be considered, especially from a private sector perspective, where you're asking private investors to take a risk. And part of that risk is the project's ability to acquire the land for the project. But in talking to landowner advocacy groups and others, I think we're getting a real positive, some real positive feedback from the tools we have at our disposal to accommodate the existing uses of land, and of course the small footprint is very appealing in our use of existing rights of way. Oh, thanks. Yeah. I talked for so long, I forgot the question. I referenced earlier the project that Eric and others in North Texas are working on to connect Fort Worth and Dallas with high-speed rail. And that would, of course, be a different level of service than is currently offered by the TRE, is I think what is being proposed. And so our project is proposed to go from downtown Dallas into downtown Houston. And would of course tie in Dallas with DART, and depending on where the station is, could also connect or share stations or provide connectivity in some way to TRE, and in turn to DCTA and the T. And then in the Houston area, of course, it's incredibly important to link with Houston Metro, but it's also really important to provide really easy connectivity to the highway and thoroughfare system, because most of our riders, at least on day one, will get to the station by car.
I think an important part of that question too is that there's public scoping meetings that are now being started in the Metroplex for this project. So if the public has some thoughts and views on some of those connective issues that would be important to them, now is the time for that to be voiced, so that that can be put into the equation of the analysis for the project.
That's right.
Another question from the audience is to the other speakers. If there is the new investment in the high-speed rail, do you see that being an opportunity for connections from existing other systems that would then feed into rail stations and or otherwise generate interest in transit along that corridor?
One of the biggest challenges in transit, particularly on the rail side, is not getting from station to station, but it's the last mile connection from the station to the front door of either from your home or to your office. That's where I think DCTA, DART, the T, Houston Metro, all those different agencies fill that gap. And so you can make that with can you ride a bike? Can you take transit? Use your car? I agree with Travis. There's going to be a lot of people that will drive to the stations, but there's a lot of people that this provides an opportunity and a growth opportunity for our agencies to be able to build onto that.
So I would say that stops along the way. I know you're having a scoping meeting in Bryan. This is one area where clearly the urban systems and the rural systems would look to connect into this, because I think, it is a system of systems, and I think one of the great challenges of projects like this is to, from the get-go and from a design standpoint and from a public understanding standpoint is the notion of integrating systems through design, through fares, through communication, whatever we can do to sort of maximize that access opportunity for all populations is a win-win for all of us.
Closely related, a question for Mr. Skinner is, how would you characterize the types of trips that are made on Greyhound? Are they long distance, short distance? What are the primary destinations? Could you tell us a little bit about the profile of your user group?
Oh, it's very varied, really, because you have some people that will use Greyhound like on a daily basis. You know, we have students that will, like from Longview to Tyler, or going to, you know, college students, you know, they'll ride it every day. But then we'll have some that come in that this is their annual trip, you know, and they're going to the West Coast to see family there. It's very varied, you know. There's not a typical trip. It's typical, you know, for the individual, you know, for what their needs are, but they're very varied, though. You know, because we get people that, you know, they'll come in and they'll take a annual trip to Las Vegas, you know, something like that. Or, you know, kids are going home for the summer, you know, from one parent to the other or to the grandparents, you know, things like that. So, and then we have the daily riders. So it's very varied.
We also have a couple of questions that link back to the earlier panel, which talked about freight transportation. First question, I'll go back to Mr. Skinner quickly, is Greyhound also moving a lot of freight? Is that part of your service as well, in
Yes.
addition to passenger transportation?
Yes, Greyhound does provide freight transportation, and has done so, you know, for a very, very long time. The transportation structure for, say, for Texas, you know, has definitely changed, because when I first became a part of the intercity bus business, UPS did not have the authority to ship packages in the state of Texas. And so we were flooded, you know, busting out the walls, you know, with freight, you know. And now that UPS has gained that authority, and others, you know, our volume has gone down, way down, you know, because of that. But as far as Greyhound being able to have someone drop off a package at 8 o'clock in the morning and have it in Dallas by 12 noon, you know, nobody else can provide that service. So Greyhound has kind of fallen into their niche, you know, where we're, you know, providing the most value for the service.
So one of the big challenges in the rural areas, I think, is as systems like Greyhound, as Rick talked about, as they make business decisions on which markets they can continue to serve and which markets they need to pull back from, we get funding every year to focus on maintaining that rural area access to the intercity system. And one of the areas I think in the future that we'll need to think about and talk about is how perhaps can we also incorporate the movement of packages and goods into that concept of rural area transportation. You know, one of my favorite presentations that one of the providers in the state gives is how to get a skunk head to Austin. And, you know, it allows this person to talk about the role that the rural systems play and the intercity city systems play in a very fundamental challenge of that you got to get a skunk head in for testing for rabies, and how do you do it? And what are the systems that are involved in doing that? If you go back in Texas history, you'll find that the earliest rural systems carried both freight and passengers, the earliest rural bus systems. So I think it's a time has come, we'll need to re-examine that.
One challenge we face with freight, and it's very different, it's actually competitive, and it's a limiter for us in the commuter rail business, is that because of the great increase in freight traffic, it's very difficult for commuter rails, and not only the demand, but also the liability issues, for commuter rails to operate on existing railroads. And that was a traditional business for the railroads. They've gotten out of it. But for us to insert ourselves into that is extremely difficult, and that's something we're working on our legislative agenda to try to address.
I'll just add, we will have no freight service on our.
That's actually the next question.
Yeah.
You didn't ask it. So the question was, if high-speed passenger rail, not high-speed freight rail?
Right. So we're using a technology that's proven in Japan, and they've never used, or I guess they experimented early on with freight, lightweight, high value, mail, things like that. And it just wasn't a successful market for them, and frankly, their trains were full of people, and that was the better market. So we have no plans to integrate freight service into our system at this point.
And what you see, and Jim's kind of alluding to, is the business model for railroads that's changed over time to where they've really wanted to focus on freight, and that passenger systems are having to find the capacity where they can or add it on themselves. So looking from a passenger's perspective, how do you develop your own capacity in order to be able to run service is kind of the mantra versus trying to access service or capacity that someone else used to own, because it's being utilized, as we had in the previous discussion, quite vigorously with the freight movement coming to and through Texas.
There are also some questions wanting a little bit more detail about the comparison between a high-speed rail trip between Dallas and Houston and a similar trip on our local airline, Southwest Airlines. So the questions are, what is the distinction between the two types of trips? What is the advantage of high-speed? Where are the stations going to be? How accessible will the stations be to other local destinations? I think someone is planning a trip.
Well, good. We're selling tickets. The first ticket's really, really expensive, but we're selling tickets. So the experience really is fundamentally different from a trip on an airplane, which, we, like everyone else, we refer to Southwest as the company jet. We use them all the time. But it's fundamentally different, and part of it has to do with where the stations are. You put airports where people aren't, and you put train stations where people are. We can have parking and retail and residential and office space right on top of the station, right next to the station, because we don't have runways and all the rest of it. So it's a matter of back to Jim. Back to Jim's point, it's the last mile, but it can also be your first mile. If you walk to the station because your office is close by, or you live close by, or if you're a couple miles away, you ride your bike to the station, or if you're still taking your car or taking transit, it's much more accessible. The security situation is a little bit different. You can't hijack a train. It's a little bit of a different target. And so the security that's been used successfully in Europe and Asia for decades is very different. But one of the consequences is it's much less intrusive on the passenger and takes much less time. So it's a much easier process to get to the train station, scan your ticket, board the train, and be on your way. And it's appealing in that it's closer to where you are. It's closer to the business centers in Dallas and Houston, where our stations will hopefully be. But we know we won't catch everybody. We know that no matter where you put one station in the Metroplex or one station in Houston, you're not going to capture all 7 or 8 million people that live in each of those areas. So it won't be for everybody. Our studies have shown very, very conservatively that it will appeal to enough people that the project will work. But we think this will be a really, really attractive alternative for folks that are traveling back and forth today, because it's a much more pleasant experience, both getting to the train station while you're on the train and getting from the train station to your final destination versus doing so by air or auto. But it won't be so for everybody, and that's okay. There's a really big population that needs to be served. And like I said before, I think there are a lot of folks, or we found that there are a lot of folks that just aren't making the trip because neither of the alternatives available to them now meet their needs. It's too much of a hassle. It's too expensive. The airports are too far away from their meetings or from where their offices are or where they live. And so we think we found a really nice niche in where we're headed with these high-speed rail stations and the service we can provide.
The question is, Texas is growing so rapidly, and our main North Dallas is becoming north central Texas. Austin is growing very rapidly. Houston's expanding both to the north and the south. But the question is, how does this impact each of your provisions of service? Is it changing the way that you provide service? Is it changing the markets that you serve? And does it impact your opportunity to be successful?
We're faced with a lot of challenges in the Dallas area, particularly in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, with the growth, because most of it's happening outside of any of the transit service areas. And so the challenge we have is how do we expand the service to meet those areas, and funding is at the heart of where, one of the challenges that we face. In the 3 communities we serve, we have half-cent sales tax levies that provide the majority of funding for our operations. Because of 4A, 4B taxes, a lot of those other communities don't have the capacity to do that or the will to do it. I mean, I've been in front of a to be unnamed city council meeting where they told me, why don't people take cabs? And we're trying to answer those questions that, you're going to find yourself on an island if in the long term. These are typically very affluent areas, very, that's the growth, it's where the sprawl is happening. And in many cases, they're actually very difficult to serve with transit because they're so spread out. I will make one note, though, on the system that we find ourselves in terms of the political arena in which we all operate. Denton County is probably one of the reddest counties in probably the reddest state. And we're having people demanding more service. So there is hope, but there's some real challenges in terms of how do you expand to meet those services? How do you overcome some of the questions that came up? Subsidies, how do you get past that? The DART system was built on a big long-range plan. Everybody bought into it, and they waited their turn to get it. The people are not willing to wait anymore, and those models are going to be extremely difficult to implement and have that patience. I mean, if you think of our society's kind of gotten very ADD, right? And that's a fact. And so how do you overcome that? And to your 2 to 3 year election cycles on city councils, the lack of earmarks, there's a lot of challenges that we have to face.
So I think it's showing that the growth and the rapidly urbanizing areas of the state is presenting a lot of different challenges. And I think of one of DART's challenges now is that it's surrounding communities who have opted out or have chosen not to be a part. And the growth that's taking place, say, in Collin County and other areas is just extreme. And you have other providers coming into the mix that are challenging their capacity to, they're asserting their capacity to use those facilities, to bring people into those facilities as a way of helping the region address its congestion issues, its air quality issues. It's just a very, very difficult situation for those areas to deal with. Another impact, you have urbanization occurring in rural areas. You have, but the mechanisms and the triggers for funding or to provide funding support to those transportation systems impacted by that, get triggered once every 10 years. And so not only do you have systems that are struggling with increased growth in their communities without any additional funding coming to help them deal with it, when they do get recognized as having grown, some of them go, because of the intricacies of our funding program, some of them go from being able to get funds from TxDOT for all kinds of operation. They find themselves having to go knock on Houston Metro's door all of a sudden because, guess what? You're part of that large urbanized area, and the entity that gets the federal funding for you now is Houston Metro. And there are some enormous, it's a very difficult situation to be in. We have rural programs that up until the last census were running 1,500 space park and ride lots outside of Houston, which under any kind of, I don't care how large of a transit operation you are, a 1,500 space park and ride lot, that's the real deal. That's big. And they were rural area providers that were running these large-scale congestion relief programs as a part, just by virtue of where they were located. So the growth is an enormous challenge. It stretches institutional frameworks and funding frameworks. It stretches them tremendously. And it's going to continue to be a challenge here in Texas. And I think the urbanization issue is going to be magnified with each subsequent census for the next 20 or 30 years for us to deal with.
With the Greyhound system, our deal is our service is to provide transportation from city to city. And we've seen, of course, Greyhound has come out with a change for their capacity planning. We're now more so on not say necessarily a reservation system, but the bus has got X number of seats, and for each schedule, there are X number of tickets that can be sold. And as more and more people, as these urban areas are growing, we're seeing more and more people that need to get transportation from one to the other. So, and it's good that, a person can buy a ticket and they can say, well, I can go, I've got a ticket, I've got a seat, and it's not oversold. But at the same time, we've got people that are used to the old system that I'll wait till the time that I want to travel, and I'll go in and buy a ticket and get on the bus. Okay, you may show up now and that bus is already sold out. You get bumped back to the next schedule. So it's the same thing that happens with train, airplanes, it's just being pulled into the bus system now. But it is a way to, for Greyhound to kind of manage the capacity.
I'll just add real briefly that, one thing that, we're kind of in this sweet spot, or we're trying to stay in this sweet spot where construction cost is low enough and the runnership is high enough to make this project work. And so, we're obviously noticing and observing the population growth to the north and to the west of Dallas, and to the north and to the west in Houston. But to my earlier point, no matter where you put one station, you're not going to serve everybody, equally at least. But that's where connectivity with highway thoroughfares and the transit systems comes into play. That's why it's so important. And we're working really closely with not just DART, but also Houston Metro and Gulf Coast Rail District and their future planning to make sure that as the growth in Harris County and Dallas County, Collin County, Tarrant County, Rockwall County, and on and on and on, continues to grow at the pace that it is, those folks have really efficient access into the system, and eventually funnel into us if they're going to Houston from Dallas.
Well, one of the things that kind of also challenges, it looks like, is through technology, there's new opportunities for connectivity. There's new systems that are emerging, whether it be a mega bus or the use of Uber or the car sharing apps. Do you see those taking a place in the transportation space, or are they just kind of a passing fad? What do you all think?
I think Jim hit it on the nose earlier, where you see a lot of folks who, young, I grew up in the country and I couldn't wait to get my driver's license in my car, and that was freedom. And now freedom is your cell phone, and now in your freedom, by having a cell phone, you also have Uber and you have everything else. So I think it's further enabling people to get away from auto as their sole mode of travel. And so as long as other systems are coming online to continue to fill in that gap, I think we're going to further enable that trend, which is ultimately good for those of us who do drive. The person that would have been in the car in front of us is now on a train or a bus or an Uber car.
Well, I think it's challenging a lot of our traditional systems to stay ahead of the market. I think as these new technologies come on board with making it easier for folks to find other options, perhaps the agencies that are going to be successful are those that are going to be continuing to embrace the changes in technology, to try and stay out ahead of them, to position themselves and their communities as leading edge agencies that take full advantage of all of the technology that's out there, making it as easy as they can for people to access their systems, to get information on them, to do their transactions, to do their business while using your system. I mean, there's all kinds of ways, and I think that it's going to continue to push the traditional systems as the Uber and the Lyfts and the megabuses of the world come with their different operating models and their different business models. It's going to continue to push the traditional systems to really take a close look at how they operate their services.
I think of some of the things that some of the models that beyond Uber and some of these car sharing, those are going to, I mean, I don't think those are going to challenge the systems. In fact, I think they're complementary. We're all challenged with the last mile trip, any way you cut it. So I don't see those as being an issue. I think one of the models that we need to look to is what's happening in Silicon Valley. Is a lot of the larger companies are actually providing their own bus service to tackle point-to-point service. And is that something that, as an agency, we should be thinking that's how we should do business in some ways, getting away from the traditional fixed route? We're going to go and hit as much as we can. Is there an addition to that where we could really do the kind of service, whether it's between Denton and Fort Worth, whether it's Alliance Airport is tough. I mean, huge population, but very spread out. Very difficult to serve with transit. How can you get to doing the right, what's the best market? How can you make that happen and think through how the success they're having? I mean, if Microsoft wasn't having success with it, they wouldn't be doing it. And so how can we make some of those things and some of those models fit within our regulatory environment, which they don't have to face? But how can we have success with that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. As Eric mentioned, I spent quite a bit of time up in Seattle, and we went through an entire system transition between 1999 and 2003 or 4, where we literally reinvented the entire system up there. And a large new element of that reinvented system were, in fact, either community-based programs where communities ran their own system, because that's how they were best able to get the kind of system they wanted for themselves, to employer-based systems. And in fact, Microsoft was one of the first employers in the region there who opted to run their own network because they felt it was a better fit for them. And so how did we as an organization move from resisting that, because we should be doing that, to embracing it as maybe that's the best solution? Maybe we don't have to be everywhere. And how can we work with these other kinds of systems that perhaps fit the need better? How do we embrace them into our own system?
Well, hopefully, as we're wrapping up here, we provide you a little context about how different ways to connect here in Texas. I want to give a big round of applause to our panelists for taking the time to share information with us. Equally important, I appreciate everybody here staying some time with us and asking very excellent questions and helping with dialogue.